Hello, and welcome back. It's so great to see you. Today is a wonderful and really terrible, sad day, because today is the day I'm going to read the last 4 chapters, oh my god, in Coraline. Oh, why don't you come over here, buddy? My dogs are in here because it's raining and there's kind of a little bit of thunder. It's really gloomy and they really hate it. So they're in here with me and I'm hoping that they'll be good and not bark and be really loud. I would really appreciate that. So let's get right to it and read the last 4 chapters of Coraline. And I know this is a really sad day, but I actually already started the next book. I already filmed the video because I was really excited to read it, and with good reason, because I've been thinking about it every day since I started reading it. It's one of my favorite books. And that is Peter and the Starcatchers. So, you know what? I really hope you guys enjoy it. I do. And it won't be the next Coraline, but it's like pretty okay. Okay, so last time I read through chapter 9. Okay, so just a recap on Coraline. The last chapter that I read was like my favorite one, and that's the one where she goes to the other flat in the other mother's world, and she lifts up the trapdoor, and the other father is this like formless blob. He lunges at her and tries to like eat her or stop her. I don't know what he was gonna do, but it was a nightmare. And she escaped, trapped him down there, and then just walked outside and started going up the stairs to Bobinski's flat, which is the like crazy old man upstairs is what she calls him in the movie, but he's like a kind of like a circusy older Russian man. There's a picture of him actually coming up. I might as well just show you. That's Bobinski in the book. I think he looks a little more friendly, I think, in the movie. He looks pretty weird in this drawing. Okay, so let's finish Coraline and then move on to another magical book. Chapter 10. Coraline walked up the stairs. Oh my god, I messed up already. Coraline walked up the stairs outside the building to the topmost flat, where in her world the crazy old man upstairs lived. She had gone up there once with her real mother when her mother was collecting for charity. They had stood in the open doorway, waiting for the crazy old man with the big mustache to find the envelope that Coraline's mother had left. And the flat had smelled of strange foods and pipe tobacco and odd, sharp, cheesy smelling things Coraline could not name. She had not wanted to go any further inside than that. "I'm an explorer," said Coraline out loud, but her words sounded muffled and dead on the misty air. She had made it out of the cellar, hadn't she? And she had, but if there was one thing that Coraline was certain of, It was that this flat would be worse. How? She reached the top of the house. The topmost flat had once been the attic of the house, but that was long ago. She knocked on the green painted door. It swung open, and she walked in. We have eyes and we have nervouses. We have tails and we have teeth. You'll all get what you deserve-ses when we rise from underneath. Whispered a dozen or more tiny voices in that dark flat with the roof so low where it met the walls that Coraline could almost reach up and touch it. Red eyes stared at her. Little pink feet scurried away as she came close. Darker shadows slipped through the shadows at the edges of things. It smelled much worse in here than in the real crazy old man's flat upstairs. That smelled of food, unpleasant food, to Coraline's mind, but she knew that that was a matter of taste. She did not like spices, herbs, or exotic things. This place smelled as if all the exotic foods in the world had been left out to go rotten. "Little girl," said a rustling voice in a far room. "Yes," said Coraline. "I'm not frightened," she told herself, and as she thought it, she knew that it was true. There was nothing here that frightened her. These things, even the thing in the cellar, were illusions, things made by the other mother in a ghastly parody of what the real people and real things on the other end of the corridor. She could not truly make anything, decided Coraline. She could only twist and copy and distort things that already existed. And then Coraline found herself wondering why the other mother would have placed a snow globe on the drawing room mantelpiece. For the mantelpiece in Coraline's world was quite bare. As soon as she had asked herself the question, she realized that there was actually an answer. Then the voice came again, and her train of thought was interrupted. "Come here, little girl. I know what you want, little girl." It was a rustling voice, scratchy and dry. It made Coraline think of some kind of enormous dead insect, which was silly, she knew, but how could a dead thing, especially an insect, have a voice? She walked through several rooms with low, slanting ceilings until she came to the final room. It was a bedroom, and the other crazy old man upstairs sat at the far end of the room in near darkness, bundled up in his coat and hat. As Coraline entered, he began to talk. "Nothing's changed, little girl," he said, his voice sounding like the noise dry leaves make as they rustle across the pavement. Oh, my dog's asleep, so Pip. "And what if you do everything you swore you would? What then? Nothing's changed. You'll go home. You'll be bored. You'll be ignored. No one will listen to you, not really listen to you. You're too clever and too quiet for them to understand. They don't even get your name right." I love my dog so much, but she is a snorer, and it's really loud. And it also keeps me awake at night sometimes. So she's really cute, though. Makes up for it. I just had to let her out of the room. "Stay here with us," said the voice from the figure at the end of the room. "We will listen to you and play with you and laugh with you. Your other mother will build whole worlds for you to explore and tear them down every night when you are done. Every day will be better and brighter than the one that went before. Remember the toy box? How much better would a world be built just like that, and all for you? And will there be gray, wet days where I just don't know what to do, and there's nothing to read or to watch and nowhere to go, and the day drags on forever?" asked Coraline. From the shadows, the man said, "Never." "And will there be awful meals with food made from recipes, with garlic and tarragon and broad beans in it?" asked Coraline. "Every meal will be thing of joy," whispered the voice from under the old man's hat. "Nothing will pass your lips that does not entirely delight you." "And could I have day-glow green gloves to wear and yellow Wellington boots in the shape of frogs?" asked Coraline. "Frogs, ducks, rhinos, octopuses, whatever you desire. The world will be built new for you every morning. If you stay here, you can have whatever you want." Coraline sighed. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said. "I don't want whatever I want. Nobody does. Not really. What kind of fun would it be if I just got everything I ever wanted, just like that, and it didn't mean anything? What then?" "I don't understand," said the whispery voice. "Of course you don't understand," she said, raising the stone with the hole in it to her eye. "You're just a bad copy she made of the crazy old man upstairs." "Not even that anymore," said the dead, whispery voice. There was a glow coming from the raincoat of the man at about chest height. Through the hole in the stone, the glow twinkled and shone blue-white as any star. She wished she had a stick or something to poke him with. She had no wish to get any closer to the shadowy man at the end of the room. Coraline took a step closer to the man, and he fell apart. Black rats leapt from the sleeves and from under the coat and hat, a score or more of them, red eyes shining in the dark. They chittered and they fled. The coat fluttered and fell heavily to the floor. The hat rolled into one corner of the room. Coraline reached out one hand and pulled the coat open. It was empty, although it was greasy to the touch. There was no sign of the final glass marble in it. She scanned the room, squinting through the hole in the stone, and caught sight of something that twinkled and burned like a star at floor level by the doorway. It was being carried in the forepaws of the largest black rat. As she looked, it slipped away. The other rats watched her from the corners of the rooms as she ran after it. Now, rats can run faster than people, especially over short distances. But a large black rat holding a marble in its two front paws is no match for a determined girl, even if she is small for her age, moving at a run. Smaller black rats ran back and forth across her path, trying to distract her, but she ignored them all, keeping her eyes fixed on the one with the marble, who was heading straight out of the flat toward the door. They reached the steps on the outside of the building. Coraline had time to observe that the house itself was continuing to change, becoming less distinct and flattening out even as she raced down the stairs. It reminded her of a photograph of a house, now not the thing itself. Then she was simply racing pell-mell down the steps in pursuit of the rat, with no room in her mind for anything else, certain she was gaining on it. She was running fast, too fast, she discovered, as she came to the bottom of one flight of stairs, and her foot skidded and twisted, and she went crashing onto the concrete landing. Her left knee was scraped and skinned, and the palm of one hand she had thrown out to stop herself was a mess of scraped skin and grit. It hurt a little, and it would, she knew, soon hurt much more. She picked the grit out of her palm and climbed to her feet, and, as fast as she could, knowing that she had lost and it was already too late, she went down to the final landing at the ground level. She looked around for the rat, but it was gone, and the marble with it. Her hand stung where the skin had been scraped, and there was blood trickling down her ripped pajama leg from her knee. Pajama leg? You know. It was as bad as the summer that her mother had taken the training wheels off Coraline's bicycle, but then, back then, in with all the cuts and scrapes, her knees had had scabs on top of scabs. She had had a feeling of achievement. She was learning something, doing something she had not known how to do. Now she felt nothing but cold loss. She had failed the ghost children, she had failed her parents, she had failed herself, failed everything. She closed her eyes and wished that the earth would swallow her up. There was a cough. She opened her eyes and saw the rat. It was lying on the brick path at the bottom of the stairs with a surprised look on its face, which was now several inches away from the rest of it. Its whiskers were stiff, its eyes were open wide, its teeth visible and yellow and sharp. A collar of wet blood glistened at its neck. Beside the decapitated rat, a smug expression on its face, was the black cat. It rested one paw on the gray glass marble. "I think I once mentioned," said the cat, "that I don't like rats at the best of times. It looked like you needed this one, however. I hope you don't mind my getting involved." "I think," Coraline said, trying to catch her breath, "I think you may have said something of the sort." The cat lifted its paw from the marble, which rolled toward Coraline. She picked it up. In her mind, a final voice whispered to her urgently, "She has lied to you. She will never give you up. Now she has you. She will no more give up any of us than change her nature." The hairs on the back of Coraline's neck prickled, and Coraline knew that the girl's voice told the truth. She put the marble in her dressing gown pocket with the others. She had all 3 marbles now. All she needed to do was find her parents. And Coraline realized with surprise that bit was easy. She knew exactly where her parents were. If she had stopped to think, she might have known where they were all along. The other mother could not create. She could only transform and twist and change. The mantelpiece in the drawing room back home was quite empty. But knowing that, she knew something else as well. "The other mother, she plans to break her promise. She won't let us go," said Coraline. "I wouldn't put it past her," admitted the cat. "Like I said, there's no guarantee she'll play fair." And then he raised his head. "Hello, did you see that?" "What?" "Look behind you," said the cat. The house had flattened out even more. It no longer looked like a photograph, more like a drawing, a crude charcoal scribble of a house drawn on gray paper. "Whatever's happening," said Coraline, "thank you for helping with the rat. I suppose I'm almost there, aren't I?" "So you go off into the mist or wherever you go, and I hope I get to see you at home, if she lets me go home." The cat's fur was on end, and its tail was bristling like a chimney sweep's brush. "What's wrong?" asked Coraline. "They've gone," said the cat. "They aren't there anymore. The ways in and out of this place, they just went flat." "Is that bad?" The cat lowered its tail, swishing it from side to side angrily. It made a low growling noise in the back of its throat. It walked in a circle until it was facing away from Coraline, and then it began to walk backwards, stiffly, one step at a time, until it was pushing up against Coraline's leg. She put down a hand to stroke it and could feel how hard its heart was beating. It was trembling like a dead leaf in a storm. "You'll be fine," said Coraline. "Everything will be fine. I'll take you home." The cat said nothing. "Come on, cat," said Coraline. She took a step back toward the steps, but the cat stayed where it was, looking miserable and oddly much smaller. "If the only way out is past her," said Coraline, "then that's the way we're going to go." She went back to the cat, bent down, and picked it up. The cat did not resist. It simply trembled. She supported its bottom with one hand, rested its front legs on her shoulders. The cat was heavy, but not too heavy to carry. It licked at the palm of her hand, where the blood from the scrape was welling up. Coraline walked up the stairs one step at a time, heading back to her own flat. She was aware of the marbles clicking in her pocket, aware of the stone with a hole in it, aware of the cat pressing itself against her. She got to her front door, now just a small child's scrawl of a door, and she pushed her hand against it, half expecting that her hand would rip through it, revealing nothing behind it but blackness and a scattering of stars. But the door swung open, and Coraline went through. Ooh. Okay, so this is chapter 11. Once inside, in her flat, or rather in the flat that was not hers, Coraline was pleased to see that it had not transformed into the empty drawing that the rest of the house seemed to have become. It had depth and shadows, and someone who stood in the shadows waiting for Coraline to return. "So you're back," said the other mother. She did not sound pleased. "And you brought vermin with you." "No," said Coraline. "I brought a friend." She could feel the cat stiffening under her hands as if it were anxious to be away. Coraline wanted to hold on to it like a teddy bear for reassurance, but she knew that cats hated to be squeezed, and she suspected that frightened cats were liable to bite and scratch if provoked in any way, even if they were on your side. "You know I love you," said the other mother flatly. "You have a very funny way of showing it," said Coraline. She walked down the hallway, then turned into the drawing room, steady step by steady step, pretending that she could not feel the other mother's blank black eyes on her back. Her grandmother's formal furniture was still there, and the painting on the wall of the strange fruit, but now the fruit in the painting had been eaten, and all that remained in the bowl was the browning core of an apple, several plum and peach stones, and the stem of what had formerly been a bunch of grapes. The lion pod table raked the carpet with its clawed wooden feet, as if it were impatient for something. At the end of the room, in the corner, stood the wooden door, which had once, in another place, opened onto a plain brick wall. Coraline tried not to stare at it. The window showed nothing but mist. This was it, Coraline knew, the moment of truth, the unraveling time. The other mother had followed her in. Now she stood in the center of the room, between Coraline and the mantelpiece, and looked down at Coraline with black button eyes. It was funny, Coraline thought. The other mother did not look anything at all like her own mother. She wondered how she had ever been deceived into imagining a resemblance. The other mother was huge, her head almost brushing the ceiling, and very pale, the color of a spider's belly. Her hair writhed and twined about her head, and her teeth were sharp as knives. "Well," said the other mother sharply, "where are they?" Coraline leaned against an armchair, adjusted the cat with her left hand, put her right hand into her pocket, and pulled out 3 glass marbles. They were a frosted gray, and they clinked together in the palm of her hand. The other mother reached her white fingers for them, but Coraline slipped them back into her pocket. She knew it was true then. The other mother had no intention of letting her go or keeping her word. It had been an entertainment and nothing more. "Hold on," she said. "We aren't finished yet, are we?" The other mother looked daggers, but she smiled sweetly. "No," she said, "I suppose not. After all, you still need to find your parents, don't you?" "Yes," said Coraline. "I must not look at the mantelpiece," she thought. "I must not even think about it." "Well," said the other mother, "produce them. Would you like to look in the cellar again? I have some other interesting things hidden down there, you know." "No," said Coraline. "I know where my parents are." The cat was heavy in her arms. She moved it forward, unhooking its claws from her shoulder as she did so. "Where?" "It stands to reason," said Coraline. "I've looked everywhere you'd hide them. They aren't in the house." The other mother stood very still, giving nothing away. Lips tightly closed, she might have been a wax statue. Even her hair had stopped moving. So, Coraline continued, both hands wrapped firmly around the black cat, I know where they have to be. You've hidden them in the passageway between the houses, haven't you? They are behind that door. She nodded her head toward the door in the corner. The other mother remained statue still, but a hint of smile crept back onto her face. Oh, they are they? Why don't you open it, said Coraline. They'll be there all right. It was her only way home, she knew, but it all depended on the other mother's needing to gloat, needing not only to win, but to show that she had won. The other mother reached her hand slowly into her apron pocket and produced the black iron key. The cat stirred uncomfortably in Coraline's arms as if it wanted to get down. Just stay there for a few moments longer, she thought at it, wondering if it could hear her. I'll get us both home. I said I would. I promise. She felt the cat relax ever so slightly in her arms. The other mother walked over to the door and pushed the key into the lock. She turned the key. Coraline heard the mechanism clunk heavily. She was already starting, as quietly as she could, step by step, to back away toward the mantelpiece. The other mother pushed down on the door handle and pulled open the door, revealing a corridor behind it, dark and empty. There, she said, waving her hands at the corridor. The expression of delight on her face was a very bad thing to see. You're wrong. You don't know where your parents are, do you? They aren't there. She turned and looked at Coraline. Now, she said, you're going to stay here forever and always. No, said Coraline, I'm not. And as hard as she could, she threw the black cat toward the other mother. It yowled and landed on the other mother's head, claws flailing, teeth bared, fierce and angry. Fur on end, it looked half again as big as it was in real life. Without waiting to see what would happen, Coraline reached up to the mantelpiece and closed her hand around the snow globe, pushing it deep into the pocket of her dressing gown. The cat made a deep, ululating yowl and sank its teeth into the other mother's cheek. She was flailing at it. Blood ran from the cuts on her white face, not red blood, but a deep, tarry black stuff. Coraline ran for the door. So that's the picture. It's freaking awesome. I just can't believe Coraline throws the cat at her, though. I mean, I get why she does it, but like the cat, though. She pulled the key out of the lock. Leave her, come on, she shouted to the cat. It hissed and swiped its scalpel-sharp claws at the other mother's face in one wild rake, which left black ooze trickling from several gashes on the other mother's nose. Then it sprang down toward Coraline. Quickly, she said. The cat ran toward her, and they both stepped into the dark corridor. It was colder in the corridor, like stepping down into a cellar on a warm day. The cat hesitated for a moment, then, seeing the other mother was coming toward them, it ran to Coraline and stopped by her legs. Coraline began to pull the door closed. It was heavier than she imagined a door could be, and pulling it closed was like trying to close a door against a high wind, and then she felt something from the other side starting to pull against her. Shut, she thought. Then she said out loud, Come on, please. And she felt the door begin to move, to pull closed, and to give against the phantom wind. Suddenly she was aware of other people in the corridor with her. She could not turn her head to look at them, but she knew them without having to look. Help me, please, she said, all of you. The other people in the corridor, 3 children, 2 adults, were somehow too unsubstantial to touch the door. but their hands closed about hers, and she pulled on the big iron door handle, and suddenly she felt strong. "Never let up, miss. Hold strong, whispered a voice in her head. "Pull, girl, pull," whispered another, and then a voice that sounded like her mother's, her own mother, her real, wonderful, maddening, infuriating, glorious mother, just said, "Well done, Coraline." And that was enough. Sorry. I just teared up a little bit. Dang. Okay. The door started to slip closed easily as anything. "No!" screamed a voice from behind the door, and it no longer sounded even faintly human. Something snatched at Coraline, reaching through the closing gap between the door and the doorpost. Coraline jerked her head out of the way, but the door began to open once more. Oh, damn it. "We're going to go home," said Coraline. "We are. Help me." She ducked the snatching fingers. They moved through her then. Ghost hands lent her strength that she no longer possessed. There was a final moment of resistance, as if something were caught in the door, and then with a crash, the wooden door banged closed. Something dropped from Coraline's head height to the floor. It landed with a sort of scuttling thump. "Come on," said the cat. "This is not a good place to be in. Quickly." Coraline turned her back on the door and began to run as fast as was practical through the dark corridor, running her hand along the wall to make sure she didn't bump into anything or get turned around in the darkness. It was an uphill run, and it seemed to her that it went on for a longer distance than anything could possibly go. The wall she was touching felt warm and yielding now, and, she realized, it felt as if it were covered in a fine, downy fur. It moved as if it were taking a breath. She snatched her hand away from it. Winds howled in the dark. She was scared she would bump into something, and she put her hand for the wall once more. This time what she felt was hot and wet, as if she had put her hand in somebody's mouth, and she pulled it back with a small wail. Her eyes had adjusted to the dark. She could half see, as faintly glowing patches ahead of her, 2 adults, 3 children. She could hear the cat, too, padding in the dark in front of her. And there was something else, which suddenly scuttled between her feet, nearly sending Coraline flying. She caught herself before she went down, using her own momentum to keep moving. She knew that if she fell in that corridor, she might never get up again. Whatever that corridor was older by far than the other mother. It was deep and slow, and it knew that she was there. Then daylight appeared, and she ran toward it, puffing and wheezing. "Almost there," she called encouragingly, but in the light she discovered that the race had gone and she was alone. She did not have time to wonder what had happened to them. Panting for breath, she staggered through the door and slammed it behind her with the loudest, most satisfying bang you can imagine. Coraline locked the door with the key and put the key back into her pocket. The black cat was huddled in the farthest corner of the room, the pink tip of its tongue showing, its eyes wide. Coraline went over to it and crouched down beside it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I threw you at her, but it was the only way to distract her enough to get us all out. She would never have kept her word, would she?" The cat looked up at her, then rested its head on her hand, licking her fingers with its sandpapery tongue. It began to purr. "Then we're friends," said Coraline. She sat down on one of her grandmother's uncomfortable armchairs, and the cat sprang up into her lap and made itself comfortable. The light that came through the picture window was daylight, real golden late afternoon daylight, not a white mist light. The sky was a robin's egg blue, and Coraline could see trees and beyond trees, green hills which faded on the horizon into purples and grays. The The sky had never seemed so sky, and the world had never seemed so world. Coraline stared at the leaves on the trees and at the patterns of light and shadow on the cracked bark of the trunk of the beech tree outside the window. Then she looked down at her lap, at the way the rich sunlight brushed every hair on the cat's head, turning each white whisker to gold. Nothing, she thought, had ever been so interesting. And caught up in the interestingness of the world, Coraline barely noticed that she had wriggled down and curled cat-like on her grandmother's uncomfortable armchair, nor did she notice when she fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. Okay, there's only 2 more chapters left. Chapter 12 and 13. XII. I know Roman numerals. Okay, chapter 12. Her mother shook her gently awake. "Coraline," she said, "darling, what a funny place to fall asleep, and really, this room is only for the best. We looked all over the house for you." Coraline stretched and blinked. "I'm sorry," she said. "I fell asleep." "I can see that," said her mother. "And wherever did that cat come from? He was waiting by the front door when I came in, shot out like a bullet as soon as I opened it." "Probably had things to do," said Coraline. Then she hugged her mother so tightly that her arms began to ache. Her mother hugged Coraline back. "Dinner in 15 minutes, said her mother. "Don't forget to wash your hands. And just look at those pajama bottoms. What did you do to your poor knee?" "I tripped," said Coraline. She went into the bathroom and she washed her hands and cleaned her bloody knee. She put ointment on her cuts and scrapes. I'm going to show you this picture in a second because we haven't gotten to the scene yet. She went into her bedroom, her real bedroom, her true bedroom. She pushed her hands into the pockets of her dressing gown and she pulled out 3 marbles, a stone with a hole in it, the black key, and an empty snow globe. She shook the snow globe and watched the glittery snow swirl through the water to fill the empty world. She put it down and watched the snow fall, covering the place where the little couple had once stood. Coraline took a piece of string from her toy box and she strung the black key on the string. Then she knotted the string and hung it around her neck. "There," she said. She put on some clothes and hid the key under her t-shirt. It was cold against her skin. The stone went into her pocket. Coraline walked down the hallway to her father's study. He had his back to her, but she knew, just on seeing him, that his eyes, when he turned around, would be her father's kind gray eyes. And she crept over and kissed him on the back of his balding head. "Hello, Coraline," he said. Then he looked around and smiled at her. "What was that for?" "Nothing," said Coraline. "I just miss you sometimes, that's all." "Oh, good," he said. He put his computer to sleep, stood up, and then for no reason at all, he picked Coraline up, which he had not done for such a long time, not since he had started pointing out to her that she was much too old to be carried, and he carried her into the kitchen. Dinner that night was pizza, and even though it was homemade by her father, so the crust was alternately thick and doughy and raw, or too thin and burnt. And even though he had put slices of green pepper on it, along with little meatballs and, of all things, pineapple chunks, Coraline ate the entire slice she had been given. Well, she ate everything except for the pineapple chunks. And soon enough, it was bedtime. Coraline kept the key around her neck, but she put the gray marbles beneath her pillow, and in bed that night, Coraline dreamed a dream. Okay, this is the picture. It's really white. can kind of see it. Coraline's face is pretty washed out. She was at a picnic under an old oak tree in a green meadow. The sun was high in the sky, and while there were distant fluffy white clouds on the horizon, the sky above her head was a deep, untroubled blue. There was a white linen cloth laid on the grass with bowls piled high with food. She could see salads and sandwiches, nuts and fruit, jugs of lemonade and water, and thick chocolate milk. Coraline sat on one side of the tablecloth while 3 other children took a side each. They were dressed in the oddest clothes. The smallest of them, sitting on Coraline's left, was a boy with red velvet knee breeches and a frilly white shirt. His face was dirty, and he was piling his plate high with boiled new potatoes and with what looked like cold, whole cooked trout. "This is the finest of picnics, lady," he said to her. "Yes," said Coraline, "I think it is. I wonder who organized it." "Why, I rather think you did, miss," said the tall girl, sitting opposite Coraline. She wore a brown, rather shapeless dress and had a brown bonnet on her head, which tied beneath her chin. "And we are more grateful for it and for all than ever words can say." She was eating slices of bread and jam, deftly cutting the bread from a large golden brown loaf with a huge knife, then spooning on the purple jam with a wooden spoon. She had jam all around her mouth. "Aye, this is the finest food I have eaten in centuries," said the girl on Coraline's right. She was a very pale child, dressed in what seemed to be spiders' webs. With a circle of glittering silver set in her blonde hair, Coraline could have sworn that the girl had 2 wings, like dusty silver butterfly wings, not bird wings, coming out of her back. The girl's plate was piled high with pretty flowers. She smiled at Coraline as if it had been a very long time since she had smiled, and she had almost, but not quite, forgotten how. Coraline found her liking this girl immensely. And then, in the way of dreams, the picnic was done, and they were playing in the meadow, running and shouting and tossing a glittering ball from one to another. Coraline knew it was a dream then, because none of them ever got tired or winded or out of breath. She wasn't even sweating. They just laughed and ran in a game that was partly tag, partly piggy in the middle, and partly just a magnificent romp. 3 of them ran along the ground, while the pale girl fluttered a little over their heads, swooping down on butterfly wings to grab the ball and swing up again into the sky before she tossed the ball to one of the other children. And then, without a word about it being spoken, the game was done, and the 4 of them went back to the picnic cloth, where the lunch dishes had been cleared away, and there were 4 bowls waiting for them, 3 of ice cream and 1 of honeysuckle flowers piled high. They ate with relish. "Thank you for coming to my party," said Coraline, "if it is mine." "The pleasure is ours, Coraline Jones," said the winged girl, nibbling another honeysuckle blossom. "If there were but something we could do for you, to thank you and to reward you." "Aye," said the boy with the red velvet breeches and the dirty face. He put out his hand and held Coraline's hand with his own. It was warm now. "It's a very fine thing you did for us, miss," said the tall girl. She now had a smear of chocolate ice cream all around her lips. "I'm just pleased it's all over," said Coraline. Was it her imagination, or did a shadow cross the faces of the other children at the picnic? The winged girl, the circlet in her hair glittering like a star, rested her fingers for a moment on the back of Coraline's hand. "It is over and done with, for us," she said. "This is our staging post. From here, we 3 will set out for uncharted lands." And what comes after, no one alive can say. She stopped talking. There's a but, isn't there? Said Coraline. I can feel it, like a rain cloud. The boy on her left tried to smile bravely, but his lower lip began to tremble, and he bit it with his upper teeth and said nothing. The girl in the brown bonnet shifted uncomfortably and said, Yes, miss. But I got you 3 back, said Coraline. I got Mum and Dad back. I shut the door. I locked it. What more was I meant to do? The boy squeezed Coraline's hand with his. She found herself remembering when it had been she trying to reassure him when he was a little more than a cold memory in the darkness. Well, can't you give me a clue? Said Coraline. Isn't there something you can tell me? The beldam swore by her good right hand, said the tall girl, but she lied. My governess, said the boy, used to say that nobody is ever given more to shoulder than he or she can bear. He shrugged at this, as if he had not yet made up his own mind about whether or not it was true. We wish you luck, said the winged girl, good fortune and wisdom and courage, although you have already shown that you have all 3 of these blessings, and in abundance. She hates you, blurted out the boy. She hasn't lost anything for so long. Be wise, be brave, be tricky. But it's not fair, said Coraline in her dream angrily. It's just not fair. It should be over. The boy with the dirty face stood up and hugged Coraline tightly. Take comfort in this, he whispered. Thou art alive. Thou livest. And in her dream, Coraline saw that the sun had set and the stars were twinkling in the darkening sky. Coraline stood in the meadow, and she watched as the 3 children, 2 of them walking, 1 flying, went away from her across the grass, silver in the light of the huge moon. The 3 of them came to a small wooden bridge over a stream. They stopped there and turned and waved, and Coraline waved back. And what came after was darkness. Coraline woke in the early hours of the morning, convinced she had heard something moving, but unsure what it was. She waited. Something made a rustling noise outside her bedroom door. She wondered if it was a rat. The door rattled. Coraline clambered out of bed. Go away, said Coraline sharply. Go away, or you'll be sorry. There was a pause, and then whatever it was scuttled away down the hall. There was something odd and irregular about its footsteps. If they were footsteps, Coraline found herself wondering if it was perhaps a rat with an extra leg. It isn't over, is it? She said to herself. Then she opened the bedroom door. The gray pre-dawn light showed her the whole of the corridor, completely deserted. She went toward the front door, sparing a hasty glance back at the wardrobe door mirror hanging on the wall at the other end of the hallway, seeing nothing but her own pale face staring back at her, looking sleepy and serious. Gentle, reassuring snores came from her parents' room, but the door was closed. All the doors off the corridor were closed. Whatever the scuttling thing was, it had to be here somewhere. Coraline opened the front door and looked at the gray sky. She wondered how long it would be until the sun came up, wondered whether her dream had been a true thing, while knowing in her heart that it had been. Something she had taken to be part of the shadows under the hall couch detached itself from beneath the couch and made a mad, scrabbling rush on its long, white legs, heading for the front door. Coraline's mouth dropped open in horror, and she stepped out of the way as the thing clicked and scuttled past her and out of the house, running crab-like on its too many tapping, clicking, scurrying feet. She knew what it was, and she knew what it was after. She had seen it too many times in the last few days, reaching and clutching and snatching. and popping black beetles obediently into the other mother's mouth. 5-footed crimson nailed, the color of bone. It was the other mother's right hand, and it wanted the black key. So this is what the hand looks like. There's a mourning dove going berserk outside. This hand is much creepier, I think, than the one in the movie. Oof. Look at its nails are like so long and like crooked. It's creepy. Okay, this is the last chapter, chapter 13 of Coraline. And it's sad, but I'm excited to hear the conclusion. I know what happens. Okay, chapter 13. Coraline's parents never seemed to remember anything about their time in the snow globe. At least they never said anything about it, and Coraline never mentioned it to them. Sometimes she wondered whether they had ever noticed that they had lost 2 days in the real world, and came to the eventual conclusion that they did not. Then again, there are some people who keep track of every day and every hour, and there are people who don't, and Coraline's parents were solidly in the second camp. Coraline had placed the marbles beneath her pillow before she went to sleep that first night home in her own room once more. She went back to bed after she saw the other mother's hand, although there was not much time left for sleeping, and she rested her head back on that pillow. Something scrunched gently as she did. She sat up and lifted the pillow. The fragments of the glass marbles that she saw looked like the remains of eggshells one finds beneath trees in springtime, like empty, broken robin's eggs, or even more delicate, wren's eggs, perhaps. Whatever had been inside the glass spheres had gone. Coraline thought of the 3 children waving goodbye to her in the moonlight, waving before they had crossed the silver stream. She gathered up the eggshell-thin fragments with care and placed them in a small blue box which had once held a bracelet that her grandmother had given her when she was a little girl. The bracelet was long lost, but the box remained. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible came back from visiting Miss Spink's niece, and Coraline went down to their flat for tea. It was a Monday. On Wednesday, Coraline would go back to school. A whole new school year would begin. Miss Forcible insisted on reading Coraline's tea leaves. "Well, looks like everything's mostly ship-shape and Bristol fashion, lovey," said Miss Forcible. "Sorry," said Coraline. "Everything's coming up roses," said Miss Forcible. "Well, almost everything. I'm not sure what that is." She pointed to a clump of tea leaves sticking to the side of the cup. Miss Spink tutted and reached for the cup. "Honestly, Miriam, give it over here. Let me see." She blinked through her thick spectacles. "Oh dear, no, I have no idea what that signifies. It looks almost like a hand." Coraline looked. The clump of leaves did look a little like a hand, reaching for something. Hamish the Scotty dog was hiding under Miss Forcible's chair, and he wouldn't come out. "I think he was in some sort of fight," said Miss Spink. "He has a deep gash in his side, poor dear. We'll take him to the vet later this afternoon. I wish I knew what could have done it." Something, Coraline knew, would have to be done. That final week of the holidays, the weather was magnificent, as if the summer itself were trying to make up for the miserable weather they had been having by giving them some bright and glorious days before it ended. The crazy old man upstairs called down to Coraline when he saw her coming out of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. "Hey, hi, you! Caroline!" he shouted over the railing. "It's Coraline," she said. "How are the mice?" "Something has frightened them," said the old man, scratching his mustache. I think maybe there is a weasel in the house. Something is about. I heard it in the night. In my country, we would have put down a trap for it, maybe put down a little meat or a hamburger, and when the creature comes to feast, then bam! It would get caught and never bother us any more. The mice are so scared they will not even pick up their little musical instruments. I don't think it wants meat, said Coraline. She put her hand up and touched the black key that hung about her neck. Then she went inside. She bathed herself and kept the key around her neck the whole time she was in the bath. She never took it off anymore. Something scratched at her bedroom window after she went to bed. Coraline was almost asleep, but slipped out of her bed and pulled open the curtains. A white hand with crimson fingernails leapt from the window ledge into a drain pipe and was immediately out of sight. There were deep gouges in the glass on the other side of the window. Coraline slept uneasily that night, waking up from time to time to plot and plan and ponder, then falling back into sleep, never quite certain where her pondering ended and the dream began. One ear always open for the sound of something scratching at her window pane or at her bedroom door. In the morning, Coraline said to her mother, "I'm going to have a picnic with my dolls today. Can I borrow a sheet? An old one you don't need any longer, as a tablecloth?" "I don't think we have one of those," said her mother. She opened the kitchen drawer that held the napkins and the tablecloths, and she prodded about in it. "Hold on, will this do?" It was a folded-up, disposable paper tablecloth covered with red flowers, left over from some picnic they had been on several years before. "That's perfect," said Coraline. "I didn't think you played with your dolls anymore," said Mrs. Jones. "I don't," admitted Coraline. "They're protective coloration." "Well, be back in time for lunch," said her mother. "Have a good time." Coraline filled a cardboard box with dolls and several plastic dolls' teacups. She filled a jug with water. Then she went outside. She walked down the road just as if she were going to the shops. Before she reached the supermarket, she cut across a fence into some wasteland and along an old drive, then crawled under a hedge. She had to go under the hedge in 2 journeys in order not to spill the water from the jug. It was a long, roundabout, looping journey, but at the end of it, Coraline was satisfied that she had not been followed. She came out behind the dilapidated old tennis court. She crossed over it to the meadow where the long grass swayed. She found the planks on the edge of the meadow. They were astonishingly heavy, almost too heavy for a girl to lift, even using all of her strength, but she managed. She didn't have any choice. She pulled the planks out of the way one by one, grunting and sweating with effort, revealing a deep, round, brick-lined hole in the ground. It smelled of damp and the dark. The bricks were greenish and slippery. She spread out the tablecloth and laid it carefully over the top of the well. She put a plastic doll's cup every foot or so at the edge of the well, and she weighed each cup down with the water from the jug. She put a doll in the grass beside each cup, making it look as much like a doll's tea party as she could. Then she retraced her steps back under the hedge along the dusty yellow drive, around the back of the shops, back to her house. She reached up and took the key from around her neck. She dangled it from the string as if the key were just something she liked to play with. Then she knocked on the door of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. Miss Spink opened the door. "Hello, dear," she said. "I don't want to come in," said Coraline. "I just wanted to find out how Hamish was doing." Miss Spink sighed. "The vet says that Hamish is a brave little soldier," she said. "Luckily, the cut doesn't seem to be infected. We cannot imagine what could have done it. The vet says some animal, he thinks, but has no idea what. Mr. Bobo says he thinks it might have been a weasel." "Mr. Bobo?" "The man in the top flat, Mr. Bobo. Fine old circus family, I believe. Romanian or Slovenian or Livonian or one of those countries. Bless me, I can never remember them anymore. It had never occurred to Coraline that the crazy old man upstairs actually had a name, she realized. If she'd known his name was Mr. Bobo, she would have said it every chance she got. How often do you get to say a name like Mr. Bobo aloud? Oh, said Coraline to Miss Spink, Mr. Bobo. Right. Well, she said a little louder, I am going to go and play with my dolls now. Over by the old tennis court, round the back? That's nice, dear, said Mrs. Spink. Then she added, confidentially, make sure you keep an eye out for the old well. Mr. Lovett, who was here before your time, said that he thought it might go down for half a mile or more. Coraline hoped that the hand had not heard this last, and she changed the subject. This key? Said Coraline loudly. Oh, it's just some old key from our house. It's part of my game. That's why I'm carrying it around with me on this piece of string. Well, goodbye now. What an extraordinary child, said Miss Spink to herself as she closed the door. I love that part. I think it's so funny. Coraline ambled across the meadow toward the old tennis court, dangling and swinging the black key on its piece of string as she walked. Several times she thought she saw something the color of bone in the undergrowth. It was keeping pace with her, about 30 feet away. She tried to whistle, but nothing happened, so she sang out loud instead, a song her father had made up for her when she was a little baby and which had always made her laugh. It went, Oh, my twitchy witchy girl, I think you are so nice. I give you bowls of porridge and I give you bowls of ice cream. Just like the movie. I give you lots of kisses and I give you lots of hugs, but I never give you sandwiches with bugs in. That's what it says. That was what she sang as she sauntered through the woods, and her voice hardly trembled at all. The dolls' tea party was where she had left it. She was relieved that it was not a windy day, for everything was still in its place. Every water-filled plastic cup weighed down the paper tablecloth as it was meant to. She breathed a sigh of relief. Now was the hardest part. Hello, dolls, she said brightly. It's tea time. She walked close to the paper tablecloth. I brought the lucky key, she told the dolls, to make sure we have a good picnic. And then, as carefully as she could, she leaned over and gently placed the key on the tablecloth. She was still holding on to the string. She held her breath, hoping that the cups of water at the edges of the well would weigh the cloth down, letting it take the weight of the key without collapsing into the well. The key sat in the middle of the paper picnic cloth. Coraline let go of the string and took a step back. Now it was all up to the hand. She turned to her dolls. Who would like a piece of cherry cake? She asked. Jemima, Pinky, Primrose? And she served each doll a slice of invisible cake on an invisible plate, chattering happily as she did so. From the corner of her eye, she saw something bone-white scamper from one tree trunk to another, closer and closer. She forced herself not to look at it. Jemima, said Coraline, what a bad girl you are. You've dropped your cake. Now I'll have to go over and get you a whole new slice. And she walked around the tea party until she was on the other side of it to the hand. She pretended to clean up spilled cake and to get Jemima another piece. And then, in a skittering, chittering rush, it came. The hand, running high on its fingertips, scrabbled through the tall grass and up onto a tree stump. It stood there for a moment, like a crab tasting the air, and then it made one triumphant nail-clacking leap onto the center of the paper tablecloth. Time slowed for Coraline. The white fingers closed around the black key. And then the weight and the momentum of the hand sent the plastic doll's cups flying, and the paper tablecloth, the key, and the other mother's right hand went tumbling down into the darkness of the well. Coraline counted slowly under her breath. She got up to 40 before she heard a muffled splash coming from a long way below. Someone had once told her that if you look up at the sky from the bottom of a mine shaft, even in the brightest daylight, you see a night sky and stars. Coraline wondered if the hand could see stars from where it was. She hauled the heavy planks back onto the well, covering it as carefully as she could. She didn't want anything to fall in. She didn't want anything ever to get out. Then she put her dolls and the cups back in the cardboard box she had carried them out in. Something caught her eye while she was doing this, and she straightened up in time to see the black cat stalking toward her, its tail held high and curling at the tip like a question mark. It was the first time she had seen the cat in several days since they had returned together from the other mother's place. The cat walked over to her and jumped up onto the planks that covered the well. Then slowly it winked one eye at her. It sprang down into the long grass in front of her and rolled over onto its back, wiggling about ecstatically. Coraline scratched and tickled the soft fur on its belly, and the cat purred contently. When it had had enough, it rolled over onto its front once more and walked back toward the tennis court, like a tiny patch of midnight in the midday sun. Coraline went back to the house. Mr. Bobo was waiting for her in the driveway. He clapped her on the shoulder. "The mice tell me that all is good," he said. "They say that you are our savior, Caroline." "It's Coraline, Mr. Bobo," said Coraline. "Not Caroline. Coraline." "Coraline," said Mr. Bobo, repeating her name to himself with wonderment and respect. "Very good, Coraline. The mice say that I must tell you that as soon as they are ready to perform in public, you will come up and watch them as the first audience of all. They will play Tumpy Umpy and Toodle Oodle, and they will dance and do 1,000 tricks. That is what is they say." "I would like that very much," said Coraline, "when they're ready." She knocked at Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's door. Miss Spink let her in, and Coraline went into the parlor. She put her box of dolls down on the floor. Then she put her hand into her pocket and pulled out the stone with the hole in it. "Here you go," she said. "I don't need it anymore. I'm very grateful. I think it may have saved my life and saved some other people's death." She gave them both tight hugs, although her arms barely stretched around Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible smelled like the raw garlic she had been cutting. Then Coraline picked up her box of dolls and went out. "What an extraordinary child," said Miss Spink. No one had hugged her like that since she had retired from the theater. That night, Coraline lay in bed, all bathed, teeth cleaned, with her eyes open, staring up at the ceiling. It was warm enough that now that the hand was gone, she had opened her bedroom window wide. She had insisted to her father that the curtains not be entirely closed. Her new school clothes were laid out carefully on her chair for her to put on when she woke. Normally, on the night before the first day of term, Coraline was apprehensive and nervous. But she realized there was nothing left about school that could scare her anymore. She fancied she could hear sweet music on the night air. The kind of music that can only be played on the tiniest silver trombones and trumpets and bassoons, on piccolos and tubas so delicate and small that their keys could only be pressed by the tiny pink fingers of white mice. Coraline imagined that she was back again in her dream with the two girls and the boy under the oak tree in the meadow, and she smiled. As the first stars came out, Coraline finally allowed herself to drift into sleep, while the gentle upstairs music of the mouse circus spilled out onto the warm evening air, telling the world that summer was almost done. So that was the end of the book Coraline. And I've probably read this like 20 times or something ridiculous like that. But every time I love it. And I love how the hand is like white and has crimson nails. I think that's really creepy. And I also love how she entraps the hand. She has like a tea party. I love that. So I guess like the movie is really good in its own way, and then the book is really good in another way and the same way. I just love them both. I hope you guys have a great day or a really good sleep, and I will see you next time in the next video.